the last non-race week of the season. So one last checkered flag extra for the year. Does that make you sad, Andrew?
As long as they're serving the audience, Harry, that's the main thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're all about serving the audience. Absolutely. And, well, we've got a lot to talk about. Someone who is, constantly trying to serve his audience, which is a big one for the Tifosi, not pulling any punches, is the Ferrari chairman, John Elkann, who's made some pretty firm comments in the last couple of days saying that the team's drivers need to focus on driving and talk less. We're going to dive into a bit of that. Plus, we'll also hear from Esteban Ocon about his career and life at Haas. It's Harry Benjamin, by the way, with you. And those enthusiastic dulcet tones you heard a few moments ago were, of course, the BBC's F1 correspondent, Andrew Benson. Now's the time producer Joe would like me to remind you to make sure you're subscribed to BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone settings so you never miss a new episode. And another reminder, he loves a reminder, that you can email your thoughts and questions to f1@bbc.co.uk. or use the hashtag BBCF1 on X. Now, off the back of Sao Paulo, of course, the biggest talking point is that Lando Norris now has a rather sizable lead at the top of the Drivers' Championship. Andrew, nearly a full race win clear of Oscar Piastri with just 3 rounds to go and a sprint. It was a formidable weekend from him, wasn't it?
It was 2 formidable weekends in a row, Harry, if we think back to Mexico as well. This one was not quite as dominant in terms of his margin of victory or his overall performance, because obviously Max Verstappen had an absolutely outstanding drive from the pit lane to 3rd place, nearly 2nd. But dominant all weekend, pole position for both the sprint and the Grand Prix, and then winning from lights to flag effectively both races. So he's, and in concert with Oscar Piastri having a bit of a continuing struggle in the other McLaren, you know, we were all hoping for a big showdown in Abu Dhabi, weren't we, on the final race of the season. At the moment, it's not heading in that direction. At the moment, if Norris's performances carry on in this vein, he might be winning it in Qatar, which is the penultimate race, which would be a bit of a damp squib after, you know, how close the season's been, but it also goes to show how much form has flipped since the summer break, or more to the point, since the Dutch Grand Prix, which Piastri won. It's extraordinary, really, how much it's changed, and he extended his lead by 23 points in one weekend, Norris. Piastri must be feeling pretty bruised by now, and obviously Verstappen's nearly 50 points behind, so he's pretty much out of it.
But it's not over unless it's over. Until it's over, there's still a chance it will go to Abu Dhabi.
Of course there is, Harry. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's been plenty of examples through Formula One history where things have turned around. 2007 is the classic example that people always bring up, but there've been others as well. 1986, for example, when Alain Prost came through between the 2 Williams drivers, Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet, and so on. It's just that's not the way it's going. It's pretty clear just on basic mathematics. You know, if Piastri doesn't beat Norris in Las Vegas next weekend, then it's looking pretty bleak for him. And I think the worry about that particular situation is that where Piastri's been struggling recently is on tracks with low grip. Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, has been quite clear talking about that. And of course, Las Vegas is one of the tracks with the least grip on the entire season. So, and of course, McLaren didn't do very well in Las Vegas last year. So they're a little bit concerned about that generally. So if they're not doing well and Piastri's struggling overall, obviously that doesn't suggest that there's going to be a big swing in the points, but you never know. Of course, anything can happen in Formula One. That's what they always say. What was it Murray Walker said? Formula One is if spelt backwards. So.
Absolutely. I've been using that one left, right and centre at the moment, because you just got to cling on to it, haven't you? But one thing that really aided Lando Norris and rather went against Piastri in the end was, of course, the Australian crashed out in the sprint and then received a penalty in the Grand Prix. We've actually picked out a couple of questions already, Andrew, from your F1 Q&A on the BBC Sport website. One from someone called Andrew, who's asked if you think the stewards were being harsh on Oscar Piastri in giving him a 10-second penalty for his part in the collision with Kimi Antonelli and Charles Leclerc during the Grand Prix, when most other people thought it was a racing incident. We had a couple of days to reflect on it. Where do you sit on it now?
Well, I think that it's pretty clear that if you go by the racing guidelines that the stewards have issued by the FIA, then it was a penalty. They're very specific. They say if a car is overtaking on the inside, to be entitled to be given room, it has to have its front axle at least alongside the mirror of the other car prior to and at the apex, and be driven in a fully controlled manner, particularly from entry to apex, and not have dived in. Now, the problem is that the guidelines are fine as far as they go, but there's a general feeling within Formula One, particularly among the drivers, that then the way they're administered does not reflect racing reality. And this was a good example. Piastri was pretty much completely alongside Antonelli on the pit straight running to the braking zone. Then he's on the inside on a track where there's been rain, and it's basically dried, but obviously offline there's less grip than there is online, and he's offline on the inside, and obviously there's going to be even more less grip, if you like, in this situation because of the weather conditions. So he has to brake earlier, but he's still got a lot of his car alongside Antonelli's. The problem is by the apex, by the time they make contact, his wheel does not comply with those regulations about being level with the mirror of Antonelli's car. But does that mean he shouldn't have gone for the move? I think most people would say no, he was perfectly entitled to go for the move. And the other point of the guidelines that I mentioned was about being fully in control. He's locked his wheel, his inside unloaded left-hand wheel. But he's done that because he's trying to brake because he can see that Antonelli is coming in and isn't going to give him enough room. So he's trying to avoid the contact by that point. Now, again, does that make him in the wrong? I think lots of people, and I heard Jolyon Palmer talk about this on the Channel 4 Formula One commentary as well, he thought it was a racing incident. He thought that that confluence of events that I described made it look worse for Piastri than it really was. And I think it was interesting that Charles Leclerc, who was the guy who got taken out of the race as a consequence of that collision, because he was on the outside and he gave them both loads of room as they went into the corner 3 wide. He said Oscar was optimistic, but Kimi knew that Oscar was on the inside and he kind of did the corner like Oscar was never there. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's all of Oscar's fault. I don't think it is. So I think what it raises, as it's a question that's been raised all year, is should the guidelines be revised, and should the stewards and the FIA have a bit of a conversation with the rest of Formula One about how the guidelines are administered and what they're going to do about this? Because there's a general feeling that there's too much prescription going on. People are racing to the apex, complying with the rules, but it's all a bit unnatural. Now, you can see why the rules are there. They came out of, some of the controversial moves that Max Verstappen made, particularly in 2021 against Lewis Hamilton. And there was a feeling that there was a need for them, but there's also a feeling that they haven't quite got it right yet. The last set of guidelines weren't quite right, and it feels like this set of guidelines aren't quite right yet either. And that's not my opinion I'm expressing. It's just a sort of general perception within Formula One.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think when you've got the guy as well who was kind of taken out as the innocent party, even saying, look, I think not all of the blame can be placed solely on the one driver, it certainly opens your eyes a little bit. In fact, Phil has emailed in to f1@bbc.co.uk. He said, if you penalise Piastri, why bother going racing in the first place? For what it's worth, I thought Piastri was in the wrong initially, then a racing incident. In such situations, if it's hard to decide on blame or racing incident, surely you have to go for a racing incident, or else no one will attempt anything. Loving the coverage as ever. Thank you, Phil. But he makes a point there, Andrew. Yeah,
I think the point is that the stewards decided as a consequence of those racing guidelines that Piastri was wholly responsible for the incident. And I just don't think that's right. I don't think he was. That's not to say that Antonelli was more to blame or to apportion blame in any way. It's just to say it wasn't all about what Piastri did. It wasn't completely his behaviour that was beyond the pale. And I think anyone who's watched any kind of motor racing for any length of time would agree with that. It was almost the definition of a racing incident. And of course, the thing is that the FIA and the stewards, whenever they talk, they say they don't think of consequence when they're deciding on these penalties. But the feeling within Formula One is that they absolutely do, because obviously the consequence was that someone who was completely innocent was taken out of the race. That's Charles Leclerc. And it feels to people in F1 as if they're deciding on a punishment because that's happened, rather than just viewing the incident in isolation. But the bigger question is about whether the racing guidelines and whether they're right or not, whether they're properly written out, and whether they're being applied in a thoughtful, intelligent way.
Well, that question will continue to rumble on. The other big talking point from Brazil was Lewis Hamilton's comments, and then the comments of John Elkann, the Ferrari chairman. Lewis Hamilton said his first season at Ferrari had been a nightmare. Ferrari chairman John Elkann has said the company's Formula One drivers, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, need to focus on driving and talk less. I mean, 3 rounds to go, Andrew. I mean, politics is always a fascinating watch in Formula One, even more so when it's coming kind of from the head honcho at Ferrari. What have you made of all of this?
Well, they're extraordinary comments, aren't they? And I can only think that they were triggered by those remarks from Hamilton. But and also he says drivers plural, so he must have been upset by Leclerc, who sort of regularly this year has been saying, the car isn't good enough, we're not happy with where we are, we need to work together to improve. Each time the drivers talk about the things being bad at Ferrari, they also give a positive spin as well. And the same applied to Hamilton on Sunday. He said, "This is a nightmare, and I've been living it for a while." The flip between the dream of driving for this amazing team and the nightmare of the results we've had, the ups and downs, it's challenging. But he went on to say that, we're just really having to fight through these hardships at the moment. I have to believe that these hardships lead to, I believe there is something extraordinary up ahead in my life and in my destiny. I still truly believe in this team and what we can achieve together. So it's not like Hamilton's said really bad stuff about Ferrari. And I think a lot of people have questioned the truth, in fact, of what Elkann came out with. He was saying that he was giving the mechanics, saying they were doing a really good job, and he was talking about their position at the top of the pit stop speed rankings. Now, they've not done the fastest pit stop of the season, but they're very high in the rankings. I haven't followed them exactly, but they're very high. I don't know exactly their position. Maybe you do, Harry.
They're consistently. They were actually topping the table at one point, but I think they've slipped down a couple of places now. But they're consistently quick.
Right, and then he said that the engineers were also performing well because the cars made progress. Well, yes, but it's not made enough progress, has it? Because it started the year as about the 4th fastest car, and it's still about the 4th fastest car. So they might have improved it, but they've not improved it relative to the competition, which is what it's all about. And then he said, if we look at the rest of the team, it's not up to scratch. And he particularly singled out the drivers, as you said, Harry. Now, I think Charles Leclerc, it's hard to fault anything that he's done this season. He's driven an outstanding season. People have talked a lot about George Russell and how he's having his best season in F1 and possibly the best season of any driver, which I think is questionable when you look at Max Verstappen, for example. But Leclerc's right up there as well. He's absolutely world class. And so to single him out for criticism seems a bit harsh. Of course, Hamilton's had a difficult season, but there's a lot behind that. The cultural changes he's had to go through. He doesn't like the car. He doesn't like the way it handles. He doesn't like these cars generally, the way they handle. And he's trying to find his feet. Of course, we don't know where he'll get to next year, but but when you look at Hamilton's performance, they've definitely improved through the season. On average, in qualifying in the second half of the season, he's less than 1/10 of a second behind Leclerc, and Leclerc, many people consider, is the fastest driver in the world over one lap. So, okay, Hamilton had a bad weekend in Brazil. It was bad to drive into the back of Colapinto and break his front wing in the way that he did. But you have to question Elkann's assessment when he says the engineers are doing a good job, because the car just isn't quick enough, is it? And the other strange thing was he talked about the World Endurance Championship, which Ferrari have just won, as a contrast to Formula One. And he said, when Ferrari is united, we get results. Well, it's not a fair comparison. In the World Endurance, they have something called balance of performance, where the relative performance of the cars is manipulated by the regulator to keep things level. And I think there's a lot of controversy around that within World Endurance racing. Formula One is a pure competition. The best people win, and that's the way it is. You don't get any help from the regulator. So, and also the level in World Endurance is nowhere near as high as it is in Formula One. So I don't know why he was doing it. What we're being briefed that from the sort of Ferrari direction that it was meant as a spur to drive people on to better performance. But is this the sort of thing that spurs people on to a better performance, or does it leave them feeling a little bit, harshly treated? Interesting one.
It certainly is. Just on next year, which we've sort of been saying in particular regards to Lewis Hamilton and now Ferrari as a whole, Laura has asked on the F1 Q&A page on the BBC Sport website whether the new 2026 regs could be Hamilton's saving grace. And if Ferrari gets the car wrong, what's the risk of Charles Leclerc and Hamilton moving on to different teams or indeed for Hamilton, calling time on his Formula One career?
Well, I mean, look, in Formula One, anything can happen, right? And I'm about to talk about the Ferrari drivers' contracts, and you could say, well, a contract's not worth the paper it's written on in Formula One. Still, they are contracts. Now, Hamilton's contract, they never said how long it was, other than it was multi-year. And obviously, he left Mercedes because they'd only given him a 1+1 contract, and he wanted to have longer in F1. Now, as I've written on the BBC Sport website today, I've been hearing for a while that actually Hamilton's got a 3-year firm contract at Ferrari, so to the end of 2027. And there was an exchange with the media on Thursday in Sao Paulo, which does suggest that that's the case. So he was asked, when he expected to start negotiations on a new contract, and he said, I have a pretty long contract. Normally when you do a contract, it's usually the year before it ends, you start to talk about it. I'm a little bit far from that right now. So the questioner then said, does that mean he would be doing so next year? And he said, no. So obviously if he's not talking about renewing his contract next year, that means it must go beyond next year, which means it must go at least until the end of 27. As for Leclerc, he's supposed to be on a 5-year contract till the end of 2029. I believe there might be some options in there, but still. So, I mean, look, we don't know what's going to happen next year, do we? There's obviously a lot of pressure building within Ferrari. They came into this year expecting to compete for the championship, having got very close to winning the Constructors last year. They were 16 points off McLaren, who were the winners in the end, at the end of 2024. McLaren have obviously caught everybody out with the progress they made with their car. But Ferrari have fallen backwards compared to Red Bull and Mercedes as well when you look at the season as a whole. So that's the sort of thing that if you're the team boss of Ferrari, for example, in the case of Fred Vasseur, the managers of Ferrari, i.e. Elkann, who we're talking about, and Benedetto Vigna, who's the CEO, they don't tolerate that sort of stuff for that long. So there's a lot of pressure on Ferrari to get things right for 2026. And there's, as we all know, there's a lot of change coming. There's new chassis regulations, new engine regulations, new fuel. So I think if they don't get it right, then the pressure's only going to get worse. And, when performances stay poor for a while for Ferrari, this is going to be one of their poorest years for a while. They're not going to, it doesn't look like they're going to win a race. Hamilton hasn't got a podium yet. Leclerc's had 7, I think it is it?
Yeah.
But that's not good enough for Ferrari, as Leclerc's been saying. Maybe that's what annoyed Elkann, but it isn't good enough. And I'm sure Elkann would say it himself. It's one of the worst years. We talked about 2020 and 21 being really bad when they were going on, and they were. But this is also bad, obviously. So, all the bets, the gloves are off. The bets, the bets are off. I would say next year if the car's as bad as it is this year.
Well, they were in second in the Constructors, and they've now fallen behind Mercedes and behind Red Bull to 4th. And Red Bull is essentially just a one-car team at the moment, so that rather compounds their unfortune. And a weekend to forget in Sao Paulo for Ferrari. It was, though, another strong performance in Brazil for Oliver Behrman. He finished in 6th, having finished 4th in Mexico. Now, we've spoken with Ollie throughout the season. We'll speak to him again in Abu Dhabi. He's very much a man who could be a Ferrari driver in the not too distant future, having been brought up through the Ferrari Driver Academy, made, of course, his F1 debut, replacing Carlos Sainz last year at Saudi Arabia. But how about his teammate, Esteban Ocon? The Frenchman is one of the most experienced drivers on the grid and is, of course, a race winner. But he's been fairly beaten by Behrman in the second half of the year. Earlier on in the season, I caught up with Esteban to speak about his career, his rise to Formula One, and general life at Haas.
5 Live's Chequered Flag Podcast.
Esteban, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure.
Tall, dark, handsome. That's
dark,
me. That's
tall,
me.
dark, handsome. Yes.
How would you describe yourself? Because you got the new hair going on, haven't you?
Yeah. I didn't go to the hairdresser, so yeah. The French joke would say my hairdresser's in jail. That's what people would say. But no, I think it's good sometimes to try something else. And my girlfriend was in favor. So
there we go.
So that's why I switched. But why are you saying dark?
Well,
you think I'm a dark personality?
No, and you got dark features, the eyebrows,
right, okay.
the same as me
I
with
was
the
a bit
beard.
scared
No,
for
that's
a
the
bit.
thing, isn't it? Tall, dark, and handsome. It's
Okay,
like
okay.
the James Bond kind of vibe.
All right,
Yeah.
James Bond.
But that was me. That was me, as I said.
That's you. Yes.
But actually,
The villain in James
the
Bond.
villain. Yeah. This might be insulting to you. I have had people say that we could be brothers. And
Really?
I think there is a similarity. I mean, I'm clearly the rugby player in this scenario, and,
Okay.
and you're more of the F1 driver. But
I have a good friend in Antoine Dupont, and I think you look very different to Antoine Dupont. So yeah.
Okay, well, we'll leave that one there then, shall we? Look, I want to talk a little bit just about your career overall, because you've got one of the most brilliant stories in Formula One that sometimes isn't the most prevalent that people know about. It really is a proper from rags to riches kind of story, and I just wonder, how you reflecting on where you've come from, going around the world with your dad in the same sort of caravan, using that as everything, where you built your cars, where you repaired them, where you slept, to where you are at now. How do you reflect on that?
Yeah, it's good to reflect on it, and it helps keeps feet to the ground, because obviously when you are sitting here and that's a millions worth, motorhome of the team, and thinking, this is how I'm preparing for a race weekend. You could kind of forget, but I don't. I know the sacrifices and how much it took, for me to get where I am today. It was tough for sure, but it was all worth it because I enjoy so much this sport and racing. These cars. It was always my dream, and I'm living from my dream, which is the most important thing. And I can't be thankful enough to all the people that have helped me, and my parents, as a first, but also a lot of people involved, in this sport as well that have pushed the boundaries to try and get me to where I am today. So, this is the first part of the dream, obviously, to be here and being racing in F1. Second part was to win a race. I've done that, which is amazing. But the third one is the hardest one. The third one is to win a title, and this is still, my main goal. Of course, it's not going to happen this year, but I will keep working until it happens.
I look at your career, just looking through the results and where you've come from, and doing that season in DTM, and then coming in halfway almost with one of the worst teams on the grid, but performing well, and then getting the promotion, scoring well in the midfield, the year on the sidelines as a reserve driver, coming through the ranks at Renault 2, and now where you are at Haas. Is there a particular year where you grew the most as a driver and as a person?
Yeah, I think it was definitely that 2019 season. Obviously, for many different reasons.
And that was you being reserve driver?
Yeah, being reserve driver. I was supposed to race, and with great teams as well, but for political reasons and a lot of things that I hate about this sport, and I can say that, it's the business side of it is not what I like. What I like is to be racing the cars and winning on merit and stuff like that. And there is a lot of dark side about Formula One that are not the best parts, but that's what prevented me from racing in 2019. But I've learned a lot on how a team works, where I needed to improve as a driver, and not necessarily being focused just on the track itself, but opening my eyes a little bit more to prevent things or these things happening. And I realized also how much I missed it, how lucky and privileged I was to be in that position to drive these cars. And when I didn't have it, how sad I was. I remember being in Australia, going to Andrew Chauvelin, Chauv at Mercedes, the technical director, and asking him, when am I going to test next time? And he was like, I think the next test is planned in 6 months' time. And I remember coming back to the rental car and crying in the parking lot because, I mean, I was not going to drive in F1 for 6 months. So yes, I was going to drive the simulator, fantastic, developing the car, and it's not what I wanted to hear, and it's not how I wanted to prepare to come back into racing as well in my following year, because that's what my main goal was. I had to develop that car, and we won the championship that year, as a team. But I also wanted to prepare for my comeback. And when he told me that, it was, I just remember how sad I was and how I realized that, it's not quite as straightforward as I thought.
That's such a fascinating insight. I wonder, does a driver have to develop almost two personalities, one on track inside the car and one out of it, where you can be super nice and friendly, but that can't filter into the on track? Is that something you do? Yeah,
it's quite important. For example, that example I gave you, I didn't cry in front of Chauve. I told him, "Oh, you sure? You don't think there could be a possibility somewhere before? Even with another car, at one track." I just contained myself and let the emotions run through, and nobody was there watching. Yes, I mean, outside the track, you are different to how you are inside when you close the visor, and that's very important. That's something that you get once the experience comes in as well, and the more you learn about the sport. When I was younger, I think I was more into one. I was the same, tough guy outside the car and inside the car, but there's no need for that, really. There's a lot of people that, you want to work well with, and when you close the visor, it's the sport, but outside you don't need.
Can you be friends, genuine friends with other drivers?
Yeah.
Because I know you and Mick Schumacher, obviously, I know he's not on the grid at the moment, you're good mates, but can you generally be friends?
Yeah, we are very good friends with Mick. I'm very good friends with Lance, very good friends with K-Mag, for example, who was racing here before. There's a lot of drivers that I get along super well with. We played paddle with Oscar, Alex, not too long ago. We all respect each other a lot. After the F1 movie, for example, I asked Carlos if he could give me a ride home to the hotel with my girlfriend, and he did very nicely. So he bring us back with his Ferrari to the hotel, which
Not
was
too shabby,
which was very nice. Instead of us walking for 20 minutes. So thanks, Carlos, for that. I get along well with most drivers. Of course, it's like normal life. Some people you get along well better than others, but we all respect each other.
Just to bring things up to the modern day where we're at, you speak of Carlos actually, and it's been the same with all of the comments about how Lewis Hamilton is getting on this year, new teams, new surroundings, takes a bit of time to embed yourself, really. How are you feeling? Are you feeling comfortable, confident, or have you still got some bits and bobs to fine tune?
I think I felt comfortable in this team quite early on, from obviously race 2, we've managed to get great points for the team, and we've managed to perform straight away, and it's only getting better with time, for sure. It's just up to us to do the normal thing now, optimize the car every single time that we get in, and that's where it's difficult, as a midfield team, is that we don't have margin. We need to be 100% every single time we go out with the car, and if we are not, then we are going to be outside the points. So that's the difficulty that there is. But I feel good in this team, and I think there's still good potential to do better.
Well, certainly, you've had some great results this year as well. We ask every driver that we have on the show, Esteban, the same question to sort of round things off. And out of all of your races, from karting to winning a race in Formula One, what was your best race? Is it the obvious, or is it actually something else that we may not know?
I think my best year was 2007.
Okay, do tell.
So that year was basically the French Championship in Minim, it was called. That year, in that championship, you had Pierre Gasly, Charles Leclerc, Antoine Hubert. and a lot of others, obviously, that made it into professional racing careers. And that year was I got maximum points out of the championship. So I won every heat, got all the pre-final, final maximum points, and I just felt like it was my best year in terms of how easy everything felt in terms of racing. So it seems like a long time ago, but that's where my number 31 comes from.
Okay.
I had the number 31 that year, and I saw it in many different ways. Now I thought, if I had to choose a number, that would be it, or the number 1, obviously. But that one is 2 max at the moment. And yeah, I think that year was definitely the one.
So you have actually avoided my question, because that's your best season, I suppose. Was there a particular race within that year, or would you rather say full season?
Yeah, the first race of that year, I think it was a wet race. There's a theme in there where wet races are usually the good ones for me. But I think I won with like 22 seconds or something.
Wow.
On the lead, and it was like a 12-lap race. So yeah,
That's
it was
the sign
good.
of a driver that's pretty good.
I don't know. My dad used to say, if we come and practice, even if your fingers are freezing cold and you need to get a week to recover if you are sick, we are there to practice. And while all of the other kids, they are keeping the go-kart clean, we are going to be out there. Even if we don't have tires, go out in slicks and drive. And I think it was worth the pain, because the wet weather conditions have been good for me in the past, and I hope it will continue.
Well, look, Esteban, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It's
Pleasure.
been fascinating to get to know you a little bit more. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
5 Live's Chequered Flag Podcast.
Great to hear from Esteban Ocon there. He does have a brilliant story, and it's not often, Andrew, you get drivers admitting to crying in car parks when it's not quite going their way. So that was quite revealing from Ocon there. But Haas certainly hoping for a strong end to the year as one of the 4 teams squabbling over 6th place in the Constructors' Championship right now. That is it for the week. We'll be back full team in tow for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, where we'll have all the usual stuff, including our Checkered Flag reviews and previews, plus live coverage of every session across the weekend. You can listen to all of that on BBC Sounds, and all the information on the session times and exactly where you could hear us will be on the BBC Sport website. Thank you very much for your company. This has been an IMG production for BBC Sounds.